To get straight to the point, my middle kid is a good student who is a senior in college. Youngster, I'm usually a little angry with him at the moment because he asked. He kind of caught me off guard when he asked me for money for a spring break vacation to Hawaii with his friends. As I mentioned earlier, I want him to have fun and he's a lovely child, but something about the manner he requested offended me. His mother's been having mental health issues lately, and having him around would have meant a lot to her, but I suppose I can't even say that I blame him for it because I was more focused on getting wasted on a beach with his frat bros. Identical to myself when I was his age, and I recognize a lot of myself in that child. The entire experience truly brought back memories. Brought back memories of my own college years and made me consider something I hadn't considered in a while, which is my kid is the one who brought me to this page, so perhaps he will enjoy the story I'm about to share. If this is read, I attended Wharton's class of '85, and I'm still adamant about. I took pride in the fact that it was and remains the most prominent business school globally, and I took that reputation seriously. Enjoyed myself, but I also put in a ton of work since it was a different era. Some of my classmates were as insane as the Wolf of Wall Street, and I tried my best to stay out of their orbit. However, I made a somewhat rash decision during my junior year when I started dating Maria Munoz, a Puerto Rican woman, who I occasionally try to see how my life might have turned out differently if I had decided to pursue this further. She was one of several girlfriends I had who chose to spend the spring break away from home. Break as I normally took, but for the first time, Maria persuaded me to visit her extended relatives in Puerto Rico. On the island, and I readily consented because I wanted to win her over. Nevertheless, Maria frequently made jokes about how open Puerto was, and I was a nervous wreck who didn't want to ruin things. Rican families were so familiar with me that I thought they already knew a lot about me. Nonetheless, my fear was primarily unwarranted because I got along well with everyone I met and they seemed to enjoy me the most of. The purpose of the vacation was to meet her family, but as it was spring break, we did have time for a few personal excursions. Ultimately, one of those excursions involved hiking through Elgin, and an interesting truth is that since neither of us had a car, Maria's mother drove the only tropical rainforest in the U.S. National Forest System. And left us off at one of the most well-known trailheads. Since we were both somewhat crafty, we undoubtedly took. The idea was to hike, take in the view and sneak a little rum marijuana because neither of us had to drive. Everything was going according to plan, but we soon discovered that there was a significant issue with the trail we were most. I was thrilled that it was closed. I can't recall why it was flooded or whatever, but that's all I can recall. Maria was rather concerned, so I tried to reassure her that we could just go hiking on one of the many other trails the jungle had to offer, but she refused to back down and informed me that the hiking trail we intended to take was similar to There was only one hiking trail that was astronomically superior to the premier trail, and the others were nowhere near as good. However, I had long since realized the perils of disputing with her, so I really couldn't tell you that she was insistent over anything similar, so I asked her what she would like, and she suggested that we simply hike the closed. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, she and I were both quite rebellious at the time. We had come this far, and now some restriction was going to halt us with no chance, so I agreed when she suggested that proposal. After she looked at me, we quickly checked to make sure nobody was nearby and slid past the barriers. Initially laughed like a couple of fools as we started up the trail, which was exactly what we desired better, even though it seemed like we had the entire forest to ourselves. Particularly fantastic considering how well-liked this trail would have been, otherwise, picture going to a globally renowned nature site, but since you're the only one there, exclusivity of that kind isn't conceivable. In any case, we hiked for a fair amount of time, passing small waterfalls and appreciating the forest's splendor, and yes, we were drinking, not too much, but just enough to feel a good buzz. I must admit, it was a lot of fun, but then suddenly Maria yelled and leaped back, nearly toppling me, which immediately made me feel high alert, but I had no idea what had frightened her. I searched wildly until I spotted it a bit farther down the. I'll say it again, the route appeared to be a newly severed mongoose. Mongoose, a large one as well, seems to have lost its head entirely. Instructed Maria to remain in her current location and went alone to the cadaver in the hopes that it would be a stuffed animal or. I checked it without going too near and made sure it wasn't. At first, I believed that its head had been neatly hacked off, but the cut was too exact to be anything else. The worst part was that the body hadn't begun to move, except from a knife wound that was really upsetting. Maria was trembling, and I was mainly surprised since it smelt like it hadn't been there for very long. I attempted to soothe her by stating something stupid, such as that there was little chance of crime in a national forest, notwithstanding. I wrapped my arm around her and pushed her past the body, attempting to keep it out of the line of sight, but I couldn't explain it myself. My only thought at the time was to put some significant distance between us and that unfortunate dead thing, and although we kept our distance from the mongoose, I could still hear it as we strolled in silence for a bit. I could tell the moment was over since my positive mood and high had been wiped out by the adrenaline rush, even though I felt like It was evident that Maria was much more rattled, and I couldn't fathom her having any fun in the. At the very least, she stated that she preferred to follow our initial strategy of traveling the entire way to the opposite side, although it was. As we were traveling, it was clear to me that she no longer wanted to be in that forest, and I couldn't blame her. However, I was unaware of the hunting, so I was racking my brain trying to figure out what we had discovered. It didn't make any sense. Rules there, but I found it hard to believe that it would be acceptable to hunt in a national forest so near a pedestrian trail. But I couldn't understand why they had left that mongo's body there to rot. It was the only reason that sprang to mind. However, there was no other logical explanation. Perhaps a hunter had taken advantage of the chance to have. I didn't really know Maria, and he had that area of the forest to himself, just like we had. And I continued hiking for another mile or two, attempting to lift her spirits the entire time, but soon I didn't protest when she said she wasn't feeling well and wanted to go back, but I was dreading. I had to pass that location once more, primarily because I was unsure of how it would impact her and I wanted to. We turned around to make her feel at ease, and I could see that we were getting closer to where the mongoose had. Maria complied with my instruction to keep her head down so she wouldn't see, so I braced myself as we rounded the last bend, but the mongoose had vanished when the location was revealed. When I moved it, my heart began to race, and I immediately started looking at the woods around me. I was afraid that someone was hidden among them, and I wasn't ready for what happened next. Rather than seeing someone, I observed that a mongoose was hanged from one of the trees. Its paws were tied together with twine, and a putrid green liquid was dripping. I had to swear aloud as it rotated gently in the breeze and from its body that had never been there before. Maria opened her eyes when I saw it, and she immediately screamed in horror, her eyes going cold. Absolute terror, so I grabbed her wrist and told her to go before she could freeze. Started running down the trail, avoiding each other's way. I let her pass me and continued to check my shoulder, half anticipating that someone would be pursuing us, but instead a loud cry came from. A woman's cry could be heard somewhere behind us, and it was utterly horrifying. I could feel Maria's body and heard the kind of cry someone would make if they were being attacked. Shock in the middle of her stride, and for a while I thought she was going to pass out. She sobbed in panic and attempted to push herself even further, but she was already gasping for air, so I held on to her. As she slowed down, her wrist was nearly pulling her along, and we were unable to stop Maria's own chest was burning, but we had to keep going till she could hardly run no longer, so we were forced to reduce our pace to a quick stroll. I fully turned around and began to backtrack while maintaining eye contact with the trail behind us, preparing for a battle because something had. I was positive that mongoose had screamed because of something. See something rushing in our direction at any moment, but nothing occurred until the trailhead appeared. I briefly believed we were safe, but then I noticed someone observing us from close to the barricades. As soon as we got past the barricades, a park employee with his arms crossed and obviously furious began shouting at us for disobeying the rules and threatening to expel us and ban us for life, but he later received a look at Maria, who was crying and physically worn out at that moment. I warned the man everything not to. Omitting no information, he took it very seriously and insisted that we accompany him, which we did. A supervisor was waiting at a small ranger station close to the parking lot, and I had to go through the story repeatedly, but Maria remained silent when they phoned the police. Her mother finally showed up, and we departed, still trembling, but I never heard anything about Maria's family may have learned about the findings of the authorities or whether they even tried to look into the matter. Something, but I honestly wouldn't know. I haven't since we broke up the next summer and lost touch. I haven't given this incident much attention, but I believe it's still as unnerving as it was all those years ago. We never saw anyone else on that trail, and I'm not sure why, so that scream was the worst part of the entire experience. Who owned it? This occurred last year, so I'll state that I consider myself to be a fairly laid-back man, and I'd say the same about most of my pals. Let's get started. During spring break, my buddies Jackson, Ariel, and Isabel were going to be the only ones camping. We arrived late evening at a remote beach in Alabama with only stars and surf and no crowds than we had anticipated, so we parked in the nearest space and started to walk towards the beach, where it was completely silent and there were no other. There are no campers or fishers, just miles of deserted sand, according to locals. Occasionally utilize that section of the beach for nocturnal fishing, but Isabel, who knew the region. The night was deserted and not yet completely black, but the sun had begun to set, so we would need. Jackson and I started pitching the tent so we could quickly set up camp because I was so motivated that I took my dog, Bean, a Doberman who adored the beach. At one time, Ariel, we all enjoyed seeing him run and roll around. Indicated that a car in the distance had passed by twice before, so I turned around. On the tiny access road that ran next to the dunes, an ancient, dilapidated SUV slowly passed. Was only a narrow strip of packed sand that could accommodate one car on one. We were on the beach, and there was a row of bushes on the other side that made it difficult to view the main roadways. The car passed by where we were and eventually vanished down the road. The four of us dismissed it and turned around to set up, and after we were done, we all decided to have a few beers and cut it up in a circle with the girls. Drank seltzers rather than beer, which we ridiculed as it was nearly completely. That car that had drove by was back, but this time it was dark. I'm not sure who saw it first. It came to a stop when it was parallel to us, and I could see it was a man because the driver's door opened and he got out. He started to approach us because he was so tall, but I couldn't see any aspects of his face. Jackson made the kids anxious, but I reassured them, and we got up to go stop the man before he could get there. Bean was already on high alert at our campsite, so I invited him to join us because as we drew nearer, I noticed that he was walking strangely, there was a little limp, and he nearly stumbled a couple of times, but Jackson asked, "How's it going, man?" when we were close enough. In an attempt to lighten the mood, the man wasted little time in slurring, "You're on my property." His remarks, and I assumed he was a little inebriated. I informed him that we believed the beach to be public property, but keep in mind that it was. It seemed quite unlikely that a man owned the beach because there were no private signage. The man didn't respond when I stated that. Instead, he produced a knife. Began snarling in reaction to the man's body language, which, to be honest, ought to have scared the man away considering how frightening Doberman's appearance, but he didn't move and instead began to sprint in the direction of. Bean rushed at him with his knife outstretched and leaped to attack the arm that was holding the weapon, causing. I screamed, "No," at the top of my lungs, not wanting my dog to be stabbed, but Bean managed to force him to fall to the ground. As Bean bit his arm, the man who dropped the knife yelled in agony. He ran back to my side after I yelled for him to get off, but he continued to stare at the man who was now writhing. Jackson and I hurried back to the car after the man, in agony on the ground, finally got up and began to run back towards it. By the time we were done, the SUV had left, with the girls telling them everything. The girls wanted to pack up and move everything back to the car, but I was apprehensive about that plan because I thought the guy was crazy. Isabel was right when she said that I didn't want to walk in the dark with my hands full while he was telling me what he would do. I instructed Ariel to contact the police and let them know where we were, but I warned that he might come back with a pistol or anything. Soon once the police arrived, the four of us began carrying our belongings towards the parking lot. Bean was on high alert, and I must say that it was only because of him that I felt even somewhat secure. I was relieved when I saw lights up ahead of my car and the cop came out to get our statements, but I wasn't. He promptly pointed out that my car's tires were slashed, and I was startled to discover that I was prepared for what would come next. When I unholstered my pistol and followed the officer's instructions to unlock the car, he unlocked my trunk, but thank you. Thank God we had been with us since the officer was kind enough to assist me with my tire situation even though it was a false alarm. That man was most likely a drunken madman that night, and it may have been a quadruple murderer if he had gotten his way, so discovering a peaceful, quiet spot to hang out is unquestionably fantastic. But it undoubtedly has its dangers. My friend Michelle and I made a reservation for We took a weekend trip to Miami, which was our first time there. We were both 22. We took a 20-minute Uber ride from the beach to our lodging at a full house rental in Wynwood. We arrived very late on Thursday, and because we were staying until Monday, we simply went out to eat. The first night at the local bars was enjoyable, and the next day we took an Uber to Miami. We brought the towels from the rental and spent hours relaxing on the beach with other groups of people. Guys came up to us and we simply turned them away or something, but I believe there was one guy who came up to us especially. I simply had a charming accent, seemed like a good, outgoing person, and was honest about everything. He was attractive from head to toe, and when he introduced himself as Will, he inquired about our plans for the evening and asked for my phone number, which I genuinely provided, before he left on his way down the We observed him to see if he would stop and try to acquire more numbers, but he didn't appear to be with anyone. Simply leaving while glancing at his phone, and finally leaving the beach towards the street where Michelle was. I could sense he was a touch envious that he gave me more attention later that day after the beach and some. So, we left Miami Beach because, while it was spring break, it was a bit too wild for us. After a little too much, we went back to the property and drank in the backyard while munching on some goodies and beverages from a neighboring store. It was around this time that I shot when we were planning our evening by the pool, enjoying music on Michelle's speaker. When asked via text what he was doing that evening, he replied promptly that he and his pal didn't have plans yet, so he proposed that the four of us go out in Wynwood. Michelle joked that she would inquire if the friend was adorable, but I wasn't going to request that we arrange for Will and his friend to join us at the property for pre-game. They arrived at around 8, and the companion, Ken, was surprisingly attractive. I could also tell Michelle was. We were pleasantly delighted when they brought their own beverages, which they placed on the kitchen counter while we sipped in the yard. They appeared quite normal for about an hour, and everything looked to be going smoothly. Ultimately made our way to a neighboring pub, which was located in Wynwood. I must admit that Michelle and I were already intoxicated. As Ken and Will continued to purchase rounds of shots, things swiftly went hazy. I wouldn't say I passed out, but my recollection started to fade at that point, and ultimately Michelle and Ken left. Will and I were alone for a while before I had to go, probably to hook up on the opposite side of the bar. To the restroom, but before I went, I recall him asking me what I wanted for my next drink, to which I answered. I couldn't believe what I saw as I emerged from the restroom. Will seemed to be hovering over the bar's corner was obviously up to something shady, so I took a specific route to obtain a better view, and He had the two drinks in front of him, but he seemed to be hovering over them, as though he were altering my drink. Even though I might have been intoxicated, my instinct told me to go, so I did so without him noticing. I hurried out of the bar after searching for Michelle on the opposite side, but it appeared that she and Ken had left. And made numerous attempts to reach her, but she never answered. This time, Will texted me to ask where I went. I ignored it and repeatedly texted Michelle to find out what had happened and where she was. And then I finally revealed that I believe Will was attempting to deceive me and that we ought to leave these guys. Michelle texted me as I was making my way back to the Airbnb. I replied that he was hanging over the drink he had ordered, which is why I believe he was ROFing you. She texted back after I did something to it, perhaps he was simply using his phone. I tried phoning her again, but she didn't answer. Instead, she texted me back, stating, "I'm still with Ken." That I had already left, so I wouldn't be returning anyhow, and I proposed that we meet at the Airbnb. She said, "I'll be back soon," so I walked back, and when I returned, I used the code lock to get myself in. After about 10 seconds, the door automatically locked, and the same is true for the back door. Sat alone, very inebriated, and genuinely concerned about Michelle, but I also feel. I was wondering whether I was overanalyzing the whole situation with Ruthie, or if he was simply using his phone. It was too late, and I was shocked that they would never have tried to phone or text me. The next thing I recall is the rear door's knob jiggling, followed by the sound effects of the button. Michelle texted me to open the rear after the coat lock and a failed attempt sound effect. I yelled Michelle's name through the rear door, but she didn't answer, so I tried calling again. When she didn't answer her phone, I received a text back stating, "Hurry, open the door, he's coming." This is when I began to panic and shouted, "Michelle, you're frightening me," through the door. I pleaded with her to respond, but she never did, as there were no windows or peepholes to check whether it was indeed her. I rushed to the front door and peered through it because there was a peephole there, and I felt genuinely ill. I'm currently terrified for my life because I noticed what appeared to be Will hiding at the front entrance. I had a million ideas, like Michelle fleeing from Will, but I was still too scared to open the back door without getting her confirmation. I texted her back to say, "I'm calling 911 right now," but she didn't answer. Did make a 911 call and provide an explanation. I checked the peephole once more during the conversation, and Will was gone when the cops arrived. I opened the door for them, and 5 minutes later, one of them inquired if my friend was blonde. I said that he was, and he then revealed. I was relieved that she was being brought here by another officer in their squad car, but I was also. She had been crying obviously when she arrived in a second police car, which frightened everyone. To the best of her ability, she was quite inebriated. She clarified that she had. She spent an hour stranded on the streets after having her phone taken before someone assisted her in contacting the police. The person she was with, Ken or whatever his real name was the source of the texts I received from her number. They weren't ever from her. Also discovered that she had thrown her phone in the backyard pool, which they obviously removed as soon as I brought up the cops. They promised to obtain the surveillance in order to prepare a police report that included every last detail as precisely as possible. Film from the pub we visited, and we had to get in touch with the Airbnb host right away to cancel our reservation and leave. It was a long, terrifying night somewhere else, and the remainder of our journey was utterly ruined. The only reason the cops contacted was to inquire, and it took a week before they responded. Was to verify the name I received from the guy I was texting, as it didn't match the phone records for. He was utilizing another stolen number, which I had already deduced. Phone, I never heard from the police again, which is disgusting because they don't seem to care about anything. I have no desire to return to cases like these, even if the evidence is clear. After this terrible experience, I could have been able to travel to Miami. Music. For weeks, my buddy Lena and I had been anticipating spring break, but we were broke. My name is Anna, and I killed. We both couldn't afford the traditional trip to Mexico, but we were both college juniors in dire need of a change of scenery. We were somewhat limited to a location on the continental United States, ideally not too far from Hawaii, so when we We quickly reserved a low-cost Airbnb close to Charleston's historic district for 5 nights of culinary bars and we seemed to need to explore, and since it was my first spring break after turning 21, I wouldn't have to worry all the time about where my fake ID would be stolen by the 3rd night after we had settled in. Regular sightseeing in the day, going to different restaurants and pubs in the evening, and I don't drink a lot. We were enjoying ourselves more merely by taking in the sights and sounds of the city early that evening because neither is Lena. We arrived at this small seafood restaurant that we discovered online, serving fried prawn hush pui. That kind of ambience, sweet tea, made the establishment feel like a hidden gem. Although the positive atmosphere didn't stay, but I was happy that Lena had managed to go through all the touristy things to find something a little more genuine. I looked at my phone when it buzzed, even though we were halfway through our late lunch. I peered at it, but it was a number that I didn't recognize. The message simply stated, "Hey." Before displaying Lena and asking her if she recognized the number, she glanced at my phone and replied that she didn't. Believed it to be a scam or something, but typically scam texts provide more information than just, "Hey, maybe it was a wrong number." Quickly typed back, "Who is this?" and resumed eating. Lena and I were. I was giggling about something ridiculous when I received another text on my phone from the same number that said, "Look." That one outside caused me to halt, and I looked at the window next our table. I was hoping to see someone teasing me or waving. Perhaps one of my school pals had accidentally snapped a. At the same time, we took a journey to Charleston, but there was nothing there save the street with people passing by like. Lena agreed that it was probably just a hoax when I told her that someone was playing a practical joke on me. I laughed, but although none of my pals were the kind to do it, I suppose it could have, and the idea of that truly frightened me. Been a guy who had approached me before and was bored or something, but until then, everything still felt innocuous, but a few minutes later, another message appeared saying one. This person's use of the word Anna chilled me to my core. Knew my name, thus it was most likely not a hoax or an incorrect number. Lena reminded me of something I had totally forgotten about on our first date after I gasped and showed her. On a certain day in Charleston, Lena and I participated in a free meal offer at a nearby cafe. I had entirely forgotten about campaigns where they asked for your name, number, and a few other details, but as I hadn't given my number to anyone in Charleston either, so it was all I could think about when Lena brought it up. The two of us kind of freaked out when I told Lena that whoever was texting me most likely had her number as well. Dinner with each other wasn't as enjoyable after that, and to be honest, I felt completely alone. We chose to shake things off at a rooftop bar across town after paying the tab in public. After a few visits, it was obvious since it was crowded and appeared to be the kind of location that drew younger people. Drinks, I was beginning to relax and Lena and I were having fun once more, but naturally, that didn't last long. Received a message from that number again, but this time it was far worse. I went rigid since I was wearing a gorgeous red blazer. Actually, I was among the few individuals present sporting a red jacket. Anxiously searched the area, but it was pointless because everyone was there, laughing and drinking, but no. At least one wasn't staring at me when I handed Lena the message. She advised us to depart, so we started walking back to the Airbnb as carefully as we could. I continued. I looked over our shoulder to be sure we weren't being followed, and we weren't, so I bounded the door, checked all the locks, closed the drapes, and secured all the windows in an attempt to persuade ourselves. We were merely overreacting, but an hour after returning to the Airbnb, neither of us felt hungry. I always had my Uber with me when I wanted to go, so we ordered Uber Eats instead of going to some weird burger joint a few blocks away. Since I had a terrible experience with a delivery person a while ago, Eats is set to leave at the door by default. I won't discuss the estimated 50-minute wait period because it seemed like an eternity. In an attempt to get rid of the residual paranoia from earlier, we diverted ourselves by watching a stupid reality show. It worked for a little while, and then I heard a knock at the door and went to look. I was perplexed when I looked at my phone and saw an Uber Eats notice stating that the driver was on their way. Normally, I wasn't really sure why our driver had knocked on the door because Uber Eats would email a picture when the meal was delivered. Lena was equally perplexed when I looked at the door, so I got up and peeked through the peephole. Indeed, the man carrying our food bag was a random, hefty man wearing a sweatshirt. He appeared to be an ordinary Uber driver. After a few moments of watching, I thought he would put our meal down and go, but instead he just stood there. Knocked on the door once again and said, "Thank you, Uber Eats for Anna." And that he could simply leave it out there, but he didn't move. After a lengthy silence, he eventually stated, "Had to quickly come out and sign something that wasn't correct, so I traded." A knowing look with Lena, she realized right away that something was seriously off. Took out her phone and mouthed the number 911 in case I wasn't going to debate. In retrospect, it was probably a bad idea to speak to the individual aloud because he then began. He continued to knock on the door more forcefully, claiming that he had more deliveries to make and that he wanted a quick signature, but when I didn't reply, I realized that was bullshit. Began to jiggle the doorknob, but when it remained in place, he began hammering on the door while yelling my name. I honestly believed he was about to kick down the door, and I doubt Lena and I could have stopped him if he had, but then, when the door banged and I heard a siren in the distance, I heard the food bag drop to the porch. There was a lot of noise in our yard, and we could hear officers sprinting away from the home. Lena and I hurried to one of the windows just in time to witness two officers addressing that while sirens were blaring and shouting. We were afraid to walk outdoors, so we observed the man in the hoodie a few homes over as. After placing him in handcuffs and escorting him to the rear of one of their vehicles, the officers arrived at our residence, and we told them everything, including the texts I was miraculously receiving. When Lena made the call, one of the officers was only 2 blocks away from our Airbnb, explaining how they arrived so promptly. Fortunately, we were in a bustling place. They collected our testimonies and informed us that we would be hearing from them, and it quickly became clear that our cafe assumption was correct. He worked there and had captured images of the giveaway shapes and had been observing us since that afternoon, most likely because it was noted that we were only there for spring break, the police were able to easily target us or something. It was hypothesized that he had waited outside our house when the Uber Eats driver arrived, having followed us home from the bar. He must have persuaded him to give him the food, perhaps by posing as my lover or something. The man also appeared to have a criminal history, which made matters worse because we were dealing with an aggressive history, which was quite horrifying. The remainder of the journey was rather awful, and when it was time to depart Charleston, I was relieved. I'm still unsure of that man's strategy. Perhaps I try not to consider the possibility that he might force his way inside if we open the door. Would have occurred if Lena hadn't contacted the police at the appropriate time, or worse, if they hadn't been able to arrive on time. Music.